I want to introduce tonight's speaker, but I have to share that sometimes when we live in such a beautiful state, and I'm not from California, and sometimes I feel like I'm bragging just to describe our lives to those who live elsewhere, because our lives are so lovely here, right? We have beaches, mountains, skiing, surfing, creativity is incredible, the climate's beautiful. There are no bugs, really. It's pretty darn lovely. It's amazing, really. I mean, it's really top. But now we stand out in some other areas. We're consistently at the top or near the top in homelessness, violent crime, drug-related death, taxes, utility costs, gasoline prices, retail crime, and my personal favorite, the number of people fleeing from California. But we do score low on a couple of things, and that is housing affordability and our educational outcomes. What could be causing all this? Could it have something to do with corruption? How about the $1.7 million we spend on buses that we buy from China? Or the $186,000 plus that we spend per lane mile on our roads, twice the national average. Maybe there's something askew with the fact that the California Employment Department paid out $31 billion with a B, during the COVID drama to fraudsters. $31 billion, oops. While many living paycheck to paycheck were wrongly denied benefits. How and have we become the place where accountability comes to die? Tonight's speaker did a very deep dive and has some answers. After reading his book, one member commented, "This makes the mafia look legit." By the way, Jedd is going to sell these books, as Dave mentioned, on the side of the room for $20. I don't think you should be able to vote in California if you don't buy this book and read this book. I really don't. If you can see here, I have scribbled all over this book. I couldn't stop underlining. I was like frantically underlining because there's so much corruption. It's so much worse. And I have to say, I thought I knew quite a bit about, California politics and whatnot. Oh gosh, it's so much dirtier and more disgusting than we thought. So anyway, I hope you'll support this incredible research, because tonight's speakers says that the Golden State is tarnished, and indeed he's right, but it doesn't have to be this way. We are joined by the Director of Research at Peter Schweizer's Government Accountability Institute, whose ACE teams are simply brilliant in exposing corruption. I'm really pleased to say that we've hosted 5 of their researchers and fellows, including Eric Eggers, Peter's co-host on the terrific podcast, The Drill Down, Luke Rosiak, Jason Chavis, who I mentioned before, Seamus Bruner, and Kenny Hsu. And tonight, we welcome Jedd McFatter, an author, editor, trainer for the nation's top fuel security company, a poet, and an extraordinary researcher. Jedd has studied at a seminary, has worked for 3 Florida state agencies, worked in Uganda in an agroforest nonprofit, and has provided research for 3 of the GAI's #1 New York Times bestsellers. Jedd, you are kind of like the non-official son of the world's most interesting man. Remember when you used to hear a story of outrageous bizarre human activity, and you kind of assumed it was going to be somebody from Florida? Well, tonight we have a guy from Florida here to tell us of some true craziness we are enduring right here in California. Here to wake up the West Coast, our latest and newest friend from the Government Accountability Institute, Mr. Jedd McFatter.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you to the Liberty Forum. This is an honor for me to be here. And everybody can hear me good, right? Okay, so I'm gonna make sure. This is actually my first time to this part of California. I've been to Southern California a lot more, but I want to also thank my co-author who's not here, Susan Crabtree. She's a California journalist, and she grew up here and everything. And the reason really that we wrote this book is how much we love California. It's my favorite place to come. I'm from Florida, and I love my state, just like y'all love y'all state. But there's just some things about California you can't find anywhere else in the world. I think it's one of the most amazing and kind of important places. And so that's kind of part of what spurred both of us to want to write this book. And so let me see. So what I want to do to start with is the title. It's kind of a provocative title. It's the title, Bleeding the Beast: How California Politicians and Foreign Mobsters Defraud the Government and Destroy Public Trust. That's kind of a provocative title. But what I want to start with, just to begin with, is I want to read the beginning of a chapter from the book, that she mentioned that just came out. It's called Fool's Gold. The radicals, con artists, and traitors who killed the California dream and now threaten us all. I'm going to read a few excerpts from the book. And I'm going to start with the beginning of chapter 3, which is titled "Bleeding the Beast," and then we'll move on. So let me go ahead and start right now. It's a few pages, and I may pause to add some notes or make some comments as we're going along. All right, so here we go. And this will shed some more light on what this term means. The Grand Havana Room in Beverly Hills was a perfect spot for Lieutenant Governor Newsom to haul in lots of cash for his governor race. At the center of the renowned members-only cigar club, a large glass-walled room holds hundreds of humidor lockers made from Spanish cedar with brass nameplates that read like a who's who list of Hollywood elites. Over the years, deep-pocketed stars like Milton Berle, Robert De Niro, Jack Nicholson, Bruce Willis, and Danny DeVito, to name a few, would gather around the club's mahogany tables to socialize and smoke rare cigars. Arnold Schwarzenegger has been a dedicated member since the club's inception, a natural fit given his background in Hollywood and politics. Yet it was a relatively unknown lawyer named Edgar Sargsyan who decided to organize a 2016 fundraiser at the Grand Havana for Newsom's campaign for governor. Sargsyan was an Armenian businessman and recently licensed California attorney who liked to mingle at the club with Los Angeles upper crust, which is where he first befriended Arnold Schwarzenegger in 2014. The pair were known for buying each other expensive luxury gifts. Once, after purchasing Schwarzenegger a $1,500 glass of Macallan 25 Scotch and literally giving him the ring off of his finger, Sargsyan was gifted a handcrafted watch made from the metal of an Austrian tank and a ring emblazoned with the official California seal. As expected, the Grand Havana, the Grand Havana event was a huge success, and I'll show you. Yeah, this is Sargsyan on the left, and I'll mention the next guy in a minute. It was a big success. Sargsyan and his entourage of friends, which included several members of law enforcement, partied with Gavin Newsom, and the aspiring governor hauled in hefty campaign funds. What everyone failed to realize or chose to overlook was that Sargsyan was living a double life as a world-class fraudster, and that all his newfound wealth and success came directly from his involvement in organized crime. To fully understand how a guy like Sargsyan came to be throwing a ritzy fundraiser for a California campaign for governor, we need to look back 20 years to when he first made his way to the West Coast. According to media reports, when Edgar Sargsyan arrived in California, he was broke and jobless and sleeping in his car behind a Del Taco in Glendale. Despite having a law degree from a university in his home country of Armenia, the 23-year-old spoke no English, so he took a job as what's called a capper in the Armenian community that required him to haul in LA clients for Armenian attorneys in exchange for a finder's fee. During this time, Sargsyan met a lawyer who trained him in the clever arts of fraud and exploitation of local bureaucracy. Before long, he was running a sizable identity theft mill straight out of his apartment that brought in a fortune from credit card fraud alone. In one scheme, young Edgar purchased names and social security numbers from international student exchange programs and secretly built up the students' credit ratings, then took out loans and racked up large charges in their name. The truth is, Sargsyan had become a mid-level California con man who preyed upon his own ethnic community. All of that would change the day he became a U.S. citizen. Now, I do want to pause for a second. When I mentioned this thing about the student exchange numbers, taking their information and creating these fake accounts so they can boost ratings and get a loan, I think I don't know if you read recently about how there's been a lot of fake bots that have been applying for student loans. I think this is kind of related to a lot of that. And I talk about that in another section of the book, but I'm not going to talk about it tonight. All of this would change the day he became a U.S. citizen. To celebrate the occasion, Sargsyan threw a party at the Boulevard restaurant in Beverly Hills, where a friend introduced him to Lev Aslan Derman, the alleged boss of the Armenian Mafia in Los Angeles, whose nickname was the Lion. He even had a large lion on his gate of where he lived. Over the years, Derman's illicit endeavors brought in loads of money, and he was often seen rolling through the streets of Los Angeles in his armored SUV with an entourage of black-clad bodyguards, many of whom were off-duty LAPD officers. The Lion was always heavy with cash, so he bought a mansion in Bel Air down the street from Beyonce, an office in Beverly Hills, and luxurious waterfront villas in Istanbul. He was known to have a strong affinity for Bugattis, Lamborghinis, mega yachts, and private jets. Don't y'all also? Some claim that Derman had a lethal, one-of-a-kind gold ring that he could use to prick skin and inject poison during a handshake. This is true. Yeah. Clearly, Sargsyan was impressed by the Lion. In less than a month, he started dabbling in Derman's underworld, and the big bucks started rolling in. Derman owned a vast network of gas stations that he used as a business front to hide his true money-making operation, biofuel fraud on a mind-boggling scale involving illicit actors on several continents. Derman's biggest scheme was a partnership he formed with a polygamist Mormon in Utah named Jacob Kingston. This unlikely pair hailed from opposite worlds, but they had one thing in common: a well-honed talent for plundering the public coffers through fraud and manipulation. Kingston and his family operated on the outskirts of Salt Lake City, where they lived in an isolated life with strict social rules. But over the years, they really started to act like a quasi-corporation, controlling a web of companies that have been investigated for crimes like tax evasion, welfare fraud, and labor law abuse. According to prosecutors, Kingston and his clan had been running these gambits for so long that they coined an official term for it: bleeding the beast. That's where we got this term from that I used for this chapter. That's kind of like their motto, basically. Derman and Kingston devised an elaborate plan to defraud the U.S. government by claiming tax credits for biofuel that did not exist. In one stunt, and I thought this is clever, I guess, in one stunt, they rotated barge loads of falsely labeled biofuel. It was actually like, I think, dirty cooking grease, and a lot of times. They were falsely labeled, and they would rotate the barge loads in a circle pattern between ports in Texas and Louisiana, which scored them tax credits on the same load more than a dozen times sometimes. And these are like $250,000 tax credits for selling this. Sargsyan's primary role in the biofuel scheme was to launder Derman's money through California real estate, which sometimes involves showing up at a gas station with $500,000 in cash and just buying it on the spot. Within 2 years, he'd raked in more than $10 million from these deals, which he spent on a Beverly Hills penthouse, a Sherman Oaks mansion, and a private jet. He invested $500,000 in a pornography company and sucked $150,000 into a Sharon Stone movie. Also, he was involved in a lot of things. Sargsyan also paid for expensive cosmetic hair surgery and porcelain veneers for his teeth, which likely served him well when he finally decided to become a lawyer, the gangster way, of course, by paying a smart attorney a lot of cash to take the bar exam in his name. Sure, yeah. So for $140,000, Sargsyan became a fake Beverly Hills lawyer, complete with a phony law office, with polished hardwood desks, framed photos of himself shaking hands with politicians like Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Jerry Brown. And this is the same office where Gavin Newsom met with Sargsyan for his own friendly photo, on the day of the Cigar Lounge fundraiser. In it, Sargsyan points to the wall, insinuating that after Newsom gets elected, his framed photo will join the others. So the visit must have been important because, according to the Los Angeles Magazine, Newsom's convoy shut down South Rodeo Drive for the visit when he stopped by the Pilar Law Group, the law firm which Sargsyan ran an identity theft and credit card fraud ring, to have lunch in 2016. At the time, Sargsyan was presenting himself as an attorney to the then lieutenant governor. After the photo op, the pair headed over to the Grand Havana room where Sargsyan had organized the Newsom campaign event. Sargsyan texted a recap to his friend, who we later learned from legal filings was an dirty FBI agent, and he wrote, "We had lunch and talked about everything, including Levon," so the lion. Now, what that means, I don't think anybody, it's never been reported, but he's claiming that he talked to him something about his relationship with Lev Derman. So at this point, the bogus lawyer, he must have felt like all this hustling and swindling was starting to pay off. He'd somehow managed to fake his way into California's upper echelon, but things quickly went south, and I'll just kind of summarize this, when he basically double-crossed the lion. And he took one of his jets secretly somehow and stole it, and when he got angry at him, he got scared for his life, and he went to the feds and turned over all this information. And so eventually, like I say, when all the dust cleared, Lev Derman was found guilty by a jury of multiple counts of fraud and money laundering and sentenced to 40 years in prison. It was a $500 million fraud, $500 million with a B, sorry. And Jacob Kingston from Utah, he's also sentenced. And the IRS declared their crimes, quote, an unprecedented fraud against the United States and its citizens. It's one of the most egregious examples of tax fraud in U.S. history. But as Kingston's own lawyer admitted, it was really a simple fraud. This is interesting. It was really a simple fraud. The government is just writing these $1 million checks, paperwork that shows maybe you made some biodiesel. The message was clear that large, clueless, unmotivated bureaucracies with out-of-date technology and poorly designed programs are sitting ducks for the underworld masterminds who, if left unchecked, will continue to bleed California's wealth and resources. And after the investigation, the DOJ noted that throughout the scheme, Derman falsely assured Jacob Kingston that Kingston and his family would be protected by Derman's umbrella of corrupt law enforcement and immune from criminal prosecution. This umbrella consisted of, and I'll summarize this, a Homeland Security agent, an FBI agent, a local Glendale narcotics officer. So it runs the gamut of all different branches and different types of government, groups. So this is the same trio of people too that was partying with Gavin Newsom in this picture. This is the narcotics officer right here in the photo, John Ballion. So one thing I do want to mention here, a detail about this, just because it's funny and weird, is that the FBI agent who was accepting bribes, what he would do is, in a creative attempt to hide the bribes, this FBI agent would funnel the cash, that he would get from the Armenian mafia, Russian Armenian mafia. He'd take the bribe money, he would funnel it through his wife's lice removal salon. It's fake. It was called Love Bugs LLC. Yeah, it was owned by his wife, who's a licensed attorney. And then they would use the Love Bugs business card to make luxury purchases. That's how that worked. And so that was so. And also, as far as I can tell, the FBI agent's wife still hasn't been disbarred for this, but she is an attorney in California. So what happened to Sargsyan, the figure at the center of the whole fiasco? He got the lightest sentence of all, which was 6 months in prison for 2 counts of bribery. Such a weak punishment for a deeply entwined member of the Armenian mafia raises questions about whether Sargsyan's relationship with Gavin Newsom may have helped his case. In addition to the fundraiser at the Cigar Lounge, California campaign records show that Sargsyan and his wife have donated a combined $60,000 to Newsom's campaigns. He also donated $15,000 to Newsom anonymously through a shell company called Arca Capital. When news of the donations broke, a few years ago, this is years back, a spokesperson for Newsom's campaign said the governor had donated all of these donations back to charity. But a review of all the campaign finance database in California shows Newsom refunded $15,000 directly back to Sargsyan, but there's no clear indication he gave back the $60,000. There's no evidence of it. And I think I'll stop right there for now. But this is how I got to this title, breaking bleeding the beast. And what I want to talk about now, and kind of lean off of this, is this hit on a lot of topics. A lot of points of what I would call, the different ways that transnational organized crime has infiltrated California's government. And so I'm going to try to, there's a lot of things you could talk about. Like, I'm sure you've seen recently that, you might have seen how California's number one in the nation in organized retail crimes, what they call it. And I'm sure you've read about that. And a lot of these are international groups that are involved in these massive theft of retail. There's also, just a few more things that's kind of related before we start. Like California is number one in the nation for what they call, I guess, for investment fraud. There's almost people lost almost $1 billion in investment fraud in California. Now, part of that's skewed just because there's so many people here, there's so much money here. So, but also, if you look at things like espionage cases, which a lot of times involves, like, let's say Chinese espionage cases where, the Chinese Communist Party works with, organized crime groups to help steal intellectual property, company secrets, things like this. Out of all the cases that have ever been in the U.S. history, Chinese espionage cases, over half of them are all in California, and really more than a third of all of them are just in the Bay Area. And so that's a problem, because when you read a lot of these cases, they almost always involve some type of organized crime, element. If not directly, they're kind of mimicking that type of thing. So let me. So I'll start here. So I'm going to talk about some of the ways that they can infiltrate the national government. How organized crime infiltrates government. Then I'll get back to some more excerpts. But one is obviously, like we just talked about, the bribery of police or prosecutors is one way that organized crime groups kind of penetrate government. Another is, the placement of loyal individuals in government jobs. There was, and we'll talk about this later. There's a member of. Turns out, this guy turned out to be a member of, Russian Armenian organized crime, and he got busted for money laundering and embezzlement. But prior to that, he was, he's a friend of Adam Schiff's, who Adam Schiff gave him a community, top citizen award, or an award for contribution to Armenian American society. He also was endorsed by this Armenian mob guy who he was the president of the Southern California Armenian Democrats, the same guy. He was on the design and review board for Los Angeles County. He was on the state physicians review board. So this guy was in all these different various positions when it turns out he was involved in organized crime, and he had a pretty close relationship with Adam Schiff. That's just an example of what I'm talking about. Judicial fixing, which that makes sense. Blackmail of public officials through surveillance or through what they call honeypot traps. There's a million different ways this kind of thing goes on. Other ways that they can infiltrate California government is through campaign contributions. We like even what I just talked about, through fake shell companies. And I will say this, I think one of the reasons that a lot of times, like in this book, I have 7 or 8 examples of where I point out people involved in organized crime are donating to campaigns and all. This never been reported and everything, but what I've noticed is this is something that people, who are trying to uncover this type of stuff here in California to look for these patterns is a lot of times when there'll be the way that the donations are, put into the database in California is you have a column, right, where it lists the name of the contributor and then who the employer is. And what I found in a lot of cases is where there'll be one big lump sum donation that comes from one of these types of groups, and in each case, in the section where it has your name should go here, they'll just put the name of the company and they'll leave the actual employer name blank. So when people do a download or they're just looking for contributors or employers, they can never match and figure it out. So sorry, that's a kind of pattern that I picked up in my research, which helped out a lot. Once you see it, you just can start finding all these groups like this. The other thing is lobbying via front groups. There's another example, which I won't read this passage, but I could read this here in the book, where there's a group, an international nonprofit called the Armenia Fund, which was set up to deal with humanitarian issues in Armenia and to raise money here in the U.S. Well, it turns out that there have been multiple figures in organized crime involved with this group. Money that's been laundered in various things. In fact, a guy who was involved, who was a former politician in Armenia, just had his $60 million house in L.A. Taken by the police in part of this whole investigation. But that's a group that Adam Schiff has supported for years. He even raises money and makes videos for their telethons where they raise money. And a lot of that money goes to, for instance, buying buying resorts for Armenian crime figures in Armenia, like buying entire resorts that they own and things through this fund. So it's really strange. But that's an example of a lobbying front group. They lobby for these various issues here, but it's really they're lobbying for their own interests in certain ways. The manipulation of local elections, familiar with that, the employment of what they call clean politicians. And are you familiar with that idea of a clean politician would be, there's a seemingly legitimate candidate, but you can't, because you can't really trace where the money's coming from. You see what I mean? You can't trace that it's actually coming from illicit sources, so there's no way to really see. This next one, where I want, and this is actually the Armenia Fund. This is Adam Schiff with some people who are involved in this group. This is in Armenia. There's a lot of other things about him and Armenian organized crime that I could get into, but this isn't all about Russian-Armenian organized crime. Speaking of the next one, another way they can penetrate government is through real estate and development projects. And this is what you see a lot of in California, and I'm going to get into that in just a second, with this nonprofit that Gavin Newsom started. But, public contract fraud, infiltration of licensing and regulatory boards, like I mentioned earlier, the physician's licensing design review, there's different ways. Control over labor unions, the exploitation of sanctuary policies. I don't think I have to elaborate on that, right? I think we all know. EB-5 visa exploitation, California is far and away the worst. It's not even a comparison in terms of, this is an immigrant investor program, and it's just hundreds of millions of dollars of fraud have gone through this program, from Chinese investors, and it's also been infiltrated with organized crime. And I'm about to talk about this group here in just a second, that kind of hits on a lot of these points in this section right here, and there's this group called China SF, and I'll give you, before I read this section again right here, I want to some water. I want to give you a quick background. So basically, the first time Gavin Newsom went on a planned trip when he was the mayor of San Francisco, he came back with this idea that he wanted to create a nonprofit that would help bring in Chinese businesses investment to the Bay Area. Now, he came to this conclusion when he's on his trip with a Chinese billionaire whose companies have known ties to Chinese organized crime, right? That's who kind of hatched this plan. He comes back and he wants to start this. He calls it a nonprofit, but this is where I want to pick up right here with this description. Let me get it right here. So Gavin Newsom, he comes back from China. He wants to create this thing called China SF, and here's where I'll pick up. One could argue that China SF impacted the Bay Area more than any other program Newsom created as mayor. For the years 2008 to 2018, China SF claims they hauled in nearly $5.5 billion of economic impact to San Francisco and directly recruited 108 Chinese companies to establish official operations in the city. I won't, because I don't get into this later, but I'll just mention this as an aside, that $5.5 billion of economic impact was also supposed to create, all these jobs. It turns out it created around 10% of so for every $1 billion in foreign investment that's invested in the U.S., right, it creates a certain number of jobs. And for that year, there's a group who estimated it, and when you look at the calculations, they only created a little less than 10%. Right, of the average. They're not even just 10% of what the average was across the country in terms of jobs. So it was a total failure. I'll just go ahead and say that to begin with. So this new wave of Chinese infiltration included more than 1,000 Chinese companies that China itself helped to move to locations. So they brought in 108, but they also helped set up 1,000 more. You see what I mean? In a different way. So Mayor Newsom once proclaimed that as a gateway to the Pacific, China SF builds on San Francisco's history of shared cultural and economic ties with China and strengthens mutual economic prosperity through enhanced relationships between San Francisco and Chinese business. But over the years, this is where I want to get into which I'm going to talk about a little bit, it's what happens with really big bureaucracies. Over the years, media and government officials have described this gateway, right, known as China SF, in countless ways. Sometimes it's referred to as a unique public-private partnership between the mayor's office and the San Francisco Center for Economic Development. I have a little chart that's on a brochure, but none of that's really accurate, but that's what they publish. So I was putting them for you to see. Others have called it a quasi-governmental agency. These are quotes, by the way, or an international business program, or an economic development organization. It's also been labeled as merely an initiative, a collaboration, a project, or a platform. Some Chinese business documents refer to China SF as, quote, the China office of the city and county of San Francisco, which is probably the most accurate description. At one point in time, China SF described itself as a nonprofit. Okay, now on its now defunct website, and I'll show you that right here. So this is archived. I can still find this. It describes itself as a 501. You can see at the bottom, China SF is a 501c3 nonprofit, right? Which is interesting. If you look at the tagline, at China SF, we make deals happen. That's usually not the tagline you hear for a nonprofit, right? That we make deals happen. But you see here, there's 4 offices, and this is where I'll get to. This website also provides links where nonprofit donations could be made to China SF. In 2016, when speaking to a group of business investors, their director said, "We're a nonprofit. We appreciate donations. That's how we survive and how we're able to operate." However, according to the state of California, between 2009 and 2014, China SF actually was a limited liability corporation, an LLC. A private company whose only member was the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce, which is a 501c6, I guess, entity. The LLC has been listed as inactive since 2014. In other words, for a period of time, China SF was a private entity embedded in the local Chamber of Commerce. Technically, however, and this is a quote, because of requirements of the Chinese partners, the effort is housed at the San Francisco Center for Economic Development, which is, quote, the economic development arm of the chamber that is functionally integrated with but financially independent from the chamber. So just to give you an example of this kind of bureaucratic overlapping, what does that even mean, really, right? Okay, claims like this from the 2018 San Francisco Business Times are even more puzzling. This is another quote, China SF is a nonprofit organization that works in partnership with the San Francisco Center for Economic Development, also a nonprofit, to promote economic growth in both San Francisco and China. But, this is what I'm pointing out, SFCED, which is what the San Francisco Center for Economic Development, it's never been registered as a nonprofit or any type of entity in the U.S. Okay, but this is what I say, however, from 2009 to 2014, same period, a company registered in Hong Kong had the exact name, San Francisco Center for Economic Development. It doesn't seem like a coincidence. But was this the one that owned or housed China SF? I don't know. We don't know. But it's not. But the point is, you can't figure out even where the money's coming from or how this entity is structured. Does that make sense? So, if so, it wouldn't be surprising, right? Is what I was here. Because China SF has opened offices in 4 different cities. You can see them right here. So imagine this is operating out of the mayor's office, but they have 4 satellite offices in 4 different Chinese cities. Before the state of California had even reestablished an official trade office in China after a long hiatus, it appears the city of San Francisco had already had 3 by that time. No other U.S. city or even state had as many China offices as San Francisco. China SF has been operating as a de facto satellite of the mayor's offices in Shanghai since at least 2011, when the international law firm Nixon Peabody donated a portion of its Shanghai office to China SF. Okay, now a few years later in 2014, Nixon Peabody described itself as a founding sponsor of China SF, so we can assume that they supported this vision, right? Now, while it's unclear whether Nixon Peabody still provides office support for them or not, I'm not sure. But what I can say is, and I'm not sure if they benefited from this arrangement, but between 2010 and 2022, Nixon Peabody has donated more than around $100,000 to Newsom's campaign, which is more than any other law firm. China SF's website states that it serves as a facilitator, advocate, and case manager for Chinese businesses navigating city, state, and federal issues. Okay. Let me skip ahead to this other part. So China Fest was structured to operate as some kind of hybrid international joint venture between the mayor's office and the San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. Some would argue not for the sake of transparency, but so Bay Area citizens, so that they could be made privy to what's going on, but so that Newsom and subsequent mayors could personally involve themselves in every deal without having to answer for any conflict of interest. Whether deliberate or not, China SF was structured in a manner that helped several corrupt Chinese corporations come to America. And this is where I'm getting back to the organized crime thing. For example, let's look at one of the first Chinese companies that Mayor Newsom lured to San Francisco through China SF. It's called Suntec Power Holdings. So it's based in Wuxi, China. Suntec was one of the fastest growing solar companies in the world in 2005 when it became the first private Chinese company to ever be listed on the New York Stock Exchange. Okay? So the first one that was ever listed came through the China SF, so is what I'm saying. In 2007, Suntec's CEO and chairman, we call him Dr. Xi, made the Forbes World's Billionaire list, and Times Magazine dubbed him an environmental hero. CNN, New York Times, Fortune, and a lot of people heaped a lot of praise on this man. The Guardian was one of the 50 people who could save the planet. Thomas Friedman lauded Suntec's Thomas Friedman, the economist, he lauded Suntec's he lauded Suntec's green technology model as the Sputnik of our day. It was this kind of stuff they were saying about this guy. So Mayor Newsom, Mayor Newsom was known for his public admiration already of China's green technology, so it wasn't a surprise when he aggressively pushed for him to move here. If you think about it, Newsom, he dubbed San Francisco at that point, I think he called it the pace car for municipal solar projects. That's what he actually called it. But really, it had yet to rev its engine in a way. This is what I'm getting at. So in a 2002 interview with Forbes in Shanghai, Newsom explained how he had recruited Suntec. He said, "It was a big deal to get Dr. Xi in first. We sent my team back here to encourage him. I also tracked him down in the Mission District in San Francisco. He was having a casual lunch, and I surprised him saying, 'We really want you here.' Okay, it's what it takes." I wonder if he actually did that. Newsom also sent his top executive advisor, Jesse Blount, to visit the company in China and underscore how important it was to the mayor. When Suntec finally agreed to set up shop in San Francisco, it was declared a coup for Newsom because a lot of other cities have been pursuing them. So why did Suntec choose San Francisco over rival cities? And here's a quote from the Chronicle. It says, "It doesn't hurt that the space that Suntec subleased from law firm McNutt and I guess Littenecker LLP falls in a new state enterprise zone that encompasses much of the financial district," right? So another layer, the enterprise zones. The types of deals that can be made there. So Newsom explained in another way in this Forbes interview. Now this is a quote, and this one really probably almost got me more perturbed than almost anything that I read from Newsom, right? So he's talking about Suntec and China SF, and he goes, here's basically the incentives. He goes, "First, we did tax incentives. So we had something to offer these companies the minute they came into San Francisco. We changed our zoning to support these green tech companies. So we said, we have the right zoning, we have public-private transaction teams so that you have one person to meet," and this is what got me, "and you will never have to deal with the bureaucracy. We will carry your permits through the entire bureaucracy. We've got workforce incentives, payroll exemptions, and other enterprise support incentives from the state of California, and we'll pull all of them together for you." Like he rolled out the red carpet. Now my question is, why wasn't he offering these same things to Californians, right? Like when it says anybody knows has had to deal with like any type of real estate project or large infrastructure project, how difficult it is to get accomplished. The loopholes you have to go through, the permit expediters you have to pay, right? In California, there always seems to be a middleman for a lot of the things that gets done, and all that ends up being, higher costs. So I'll skip down ahead now to get to this point too. So shortly after this whole agreement got signed with Suntec, CNN reported that it was local communist leaders in Wuxi who had bankrolled Suntec since its inception in 2001, and that they quickly got their money back with plenty of interest when Suntec went public in the U.S., raising $400 million on the New York Stock Exchange. Then in March 2011, Dr. Xi welcomed the Communist Party secretary to the headquarters for an event. Yang was the Chinese, so this Communist Party leader was the one who originally helped them secure the loans from Chinese state-owned banks, okay? During the speech that day, Dr. Xi publicly acknowledged that, quote, "Suntec is the seed sown by the Communist Party of the Wuxi government." He just said it straight up. So California Utility Pacific Gas and Electric, PG&E, they ignored the possible security threats entailed by partnering with a CCP-linked business when a month later it kicked off a massive power plant construction project utilizing solar panels and hundreds of thousands of dollars of equipment and all from Suntech. Suntech continued to rapidly expand over the next year until news broke, as a lot of times it does, in the summer of 2012, that Suntech was on the hook for nearly $700 million in non-existent German government bonds. Right, yeah. And according to an AP reports, a business partner faked $680 million in collateral for a loan that they had guaranteed. Then, almost immediately, Dr. Xi was forced to resign, but nothing could stop the downfall that was coming. Soon it was revealed that many of Suntech's European managers had previously worked with the Sicilian Mafia. One of these managers was accused of orchestrating the fraudulent financing scheme. By March, they officially filed for bankruptcy and were delisted from the stock exchange. And Dr. Xi, the solar savior who was handpicked by Newsom to lead the Bay Area's green tech revolution, he lost close to $4 billion in net worth. And in the end, however, it was U.S. investors who were left holding the bag. When Suntech's massive bankruptcy was filed, it dissolved assets were used to repay Chinese creditors, leaving U.S. lenders with zilch. So that's how that happened. And so it's just important to remember that none of this would have happened, right, if they hadn't have been brought in through this, this program by Gavin Newsom. But I mean, I could go on. The nonprofit, I found out through public records that it was being primarily funded by Huawei, which I don't know if you're familiar. Huawei is one of the most widely sanctioned and banned, Chinese companies, known for, espionage and things like that. So that's who was actually funding the group for a lot of this time. What's strange now, and I'll just get back to this about China SF, it was actually now, the reason this meant a lot to Newsom is when he became lieutenant governor, he made one of the, I think 3 days before he ended his term as mayor, before he became lieutenant governor, he made this official statement where he said, we are going to use the China SF model at the state level and embed it within the GoBiz, the state level business. And so now it's part of the state level. And now it's been merged into a nonprofit called Global SF. Right. Yeah. And so the fact that he brought it along with him as lieutenant governor and then now as governor, he still wields some kind of control. It's basically the same person who ran China SF runs Global SF. So, and she was a former, head of the Bank of China and other various groups like this. So that's, the point here is how organized crime gets involved, and I mean there's a lot of reasons for that, but we'll try to talk about that in a little bit more here in a second. So I'll just mention ZNL Properties. You can see here the photo. You see it in the background, ZNL Properties. They were recruited in to San Francisco, China, from China. It's a large real estate company. He's posing with them here because it's basically him posing with, someday he decided to pose with a lot of the former companies that came in through China SF. And this group, ZNL Properties, its CEO, he actually he's a Chinese citizen, he made an anonymous $27,000 donation to Newsom's campaign. But ZNL Properties, the same thing happened. They came in, they got all these big real estate projects. They ended up having to file bankruptcy for a lot of them. He ended up being federally sentenced and charged to pay $1 million fine for bribing several of Gavin Newsom's close, friends, from who worked in waste management groups in San Francisco. Some people call it the Mohammed Nuru scandal. There's a lot of people involved, but ZNL Properties, and it's who. Now that isn't necessarily international. I mean, it's organized crime in the sense that it was a Chinese company, but they were working with Bay Area organized crime. Sometimes it's people in Bay Area working with organized crime that's kind of based overseas, if that makes sense. And I'll go through some of these fairly quick. I want to get to one more passage later, but how does this affect citizens? Some of us obviously higher taxes, right? I mean, if the money's being drained from a lot of these things, it's that gap comes from somewhere. This kind of reminds me of what I realized what a lot of organized crime groups do, and it's kind of similar to what I uncovered when I worked for the state of Florida. I created the handbook for investigating nursing home abuse, for the state of Florida. And what I realized when I was doing it was that these large plaintiffs' attorneys, firms, who would sue nursing homes, which, I mean, a lot of times they needed to be sued for things. I mean, I knew there was a lot of, but what I found out a scheme they had, what they would do is they would take all the nursing homes in a region, Tampa or Miami, and they say, okay, we got this many, here's a chain of nursing homes. And what they do is each nursing home, I saw the documents, they would attribute a number like, we're going to get 4 million from that group. We're going to extract, 10 million from that chain. So it wasn't responding to a natural process of, claims. They would assign an amount they thought they should get from that entity based on how much money it had. And then they had various ways to infiltrate the nursing home with advocates and various things to drum up a lot of stuff that fit the right kind of paperwork. You know what I mean? There's losses. So, and I think it's similar. I mean, I realize it's similar here. What happens is any large project or any like chunk of money that the California government puts out there for any project, whatever it is, you just need to know there are organized crime groups who are trying to get a piece of that and extract it, every single one. There's none that aren't. And so it's just a matter of, figuring out the way that it is. I think that's how it works. So let me see. Reduced investment. Eventually, some of these things start to happen. Underfunded schools, healthcare, criminal control of vital services, biased law enforcement. We mentioned some of these things earlier. Voter apathy and disillusionment, retaliation against whistleblowers. There's not, one thing I will say is having more avenues for whistleblowers to come forward in a trusted way where they're really protected. And even at the very local level, because a lot of people know stuff in terms of local corruption, but they think, what do I do, right? I'm not going to, go to the a federal agency, but, and this is what I want to talk about, which I think is one of the big contributors, right, is what I call California's bureaucratic sprawl. Like large what I call Byzantine bureaucracies, they always create ideal environments for organized crime infiltration due to their complexity, the opacity, and their vulnerability, to corruption. And what they do is, like I was saying, they pinpoint structural weaknesses in bureaucracies, organized crime, and that's where they go after it, if that makes sense. And I'll give a few examples right here, and then I'll read another passage. So the fragmentation, when bureaucracies split responsibilities across multiple agencies, departments, and you have layers, that it makes it where there's nobody really accountable. A lot of times things never really get done. And that's one thing you see, overlapping jurisdictions and red tape, low transparency and information silos. California is notorious for lack of transparency. From working in Florida, I can request the same exact information from the same exact type of state agency in Florida. And you can get it, usually you get it within, days, weeks. I've had things in California that have gone on for 2.5, 3 years. Every time we've ever had to sue to get records where I work, it's just from California. There's no other state. The only place that maybe is a little more difficult is Mississippi, but it's just because they don't centralize anything. You have to go county to county to county. But California, it's hard to get information. There's information that's hidden all the time. It's notorious. They wouldn't even release the state checkbook. A few years back when we requested. This type of thing. They hide a lot of data, which makes it difficult. Obviously, politically appointed officials, being used as gateways to organized crime. But these types of likes bureaucracies make it. So California shouldn't be, you shouldn't feel like you're having to, transverse a maze or something, right? Just to get things done in the state. So, and so what I want to look at next goes back to a little bit of where, talk about politically appointed officials used, right? See, I want to show you something. This is one thing I mentioned, something I came across. It's not fully in the book, but this is actually a screenshot of a spreadsheet. This is just a list this is just what I came across. So this isn't, I didn't go about this, but this is a list of 24 people that were appointed. Only one of these was hired, so really, it was like 23, 24 people that Gavin Newsom appointed who have been found guilty of crimes or ethics violations, right? Now, and this involves people who've been charged with everything from bribery, fraud, money laundering, embezzlement, extortion, even arms trafficking and murder. And I'll show you, this is an example. This is Shrimp Boy. Yeah, you might have heard of him. Yeah, he was a Chinese triad member, a Chinese organized crime. He was appointed to community, positions and group. You see, there's an honor he got. Everybody from Feinstein to Newsom and everyone else, and he ended up being charged with various things, but including murder. His real name is Raymond Chow, and he was a big leader of an organized crime group, and he was involved at the community level in various ways. It's hard to believe. You've got okay, yeah. So here's one thing that I'm gonna read a passage in just a second, but I'll go ahead and tell you the stat that relates to all this is the New York Times published a report, or I guess maybe it was an article at the end of last year. And what I said was in the previous 10 years, 576 public officials in California have been charged for corruption. 576 in the last 10 years. And, San Francisco and LA are the worst, by far. It's like, 15 or 20% just from those two cities. But, at some point you start to ask how, but the reason I bring that up is that doesn't account for the people that get appointed. You see what I mean? So that's a whole different list. Now, who knows how many that is? Because this is just 23 appointees for one politician. So it's hard to really know. And the appointees, people don't really pay attention to it, right? But that's something. So what I want to read here relates to all this, and I think I'll probably need to wrap this up here in a second. This passage, this is from a chapter called "State of Deception," which is a chapter in the book. Okay, so this is one of the most concerning things I've read, and that I read in this whole thing, or that I investigated in this whole thing, and it still concerns me honestly. And I'll start. It's the end of this chapter. I'll start reading. I'll pick up from here. Let me get one more sip. Here we go. Who walks away from $16,000 of casino chips? That was the question that triggered the colossal downfall of Los Angeles City Councilman Jose Huezer, and helped crack open an investigation into the ever-sprawling network of public corruption that seeped into every corner of L.A. So Huezer, who's now serving a 13-year prison sentence for racketeering and tax evasion, was gambling at the Palazzo Casino during a secret 2000 trip to Vegas when a casino employee recognized him and asked him to confirm his identity. He refused, and he abruptly exited the casino, leaving behind a $16,000 pile of casino chips. This type of behavior from an elected official was suspicious enough that the FBI agent was given court approval to set up wiretaps and search his emails and texts. What they discovered was alarming. Okay? These casino chips had been supplied to him as a bribe from Chinese billionaire Wei Han, an ambitious investor who at the time had plans to build the largest skyscraper west of the Mississippi River in downtown LA. For years, Juan had funded Huezer's all-expense-paid trips to Las Vegas, 20 in total, that included flights on a private jet, luxury hotel villas with private pools, tens of thousands of dollars in gambling chips, Rolls-Royce car services, something with Rolls-Royces, if you notice them, expensive food and alcohol, private casino hosts, and prostitutes. Now, Huezer used false names on flight manifesto lists, to hide his identity, hide his tracks. Investigators found that Juan paid Huezer bribes totaling more than $1 million and fronted him $600,000 in collateral for a bank loan that he used as a hush money to settle a sexual harassment claim brought by a previous aide, in his government office. So for Juan and his company, Shenzhen World was the name of his company, pay-to-play was the only viable option for getting things done in Los Angeles. All right? Just think about the LA Olympics coming up, all the corruption that's probably going to be involved to try to get all that done. It's always been that way, I guess. So Councilman Huezer held all the key positions. This is really important. He held all the key positions on committees that approved development projects, and it was his district where Han desired to build. Thing is, the organized crime folks, they know what all these people do and all the things they control. Whereas I think a lot of them says we don't really even know, really. So there it is. Huang's right-hand man, Ricky Zhang, once explained to a jury that their strategy was simple but effective. You give, 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 until one day you have a big ask, right? Former LA City Administrator Miguel Santana told the New York Times that a scandal like this was almost inevitable. The depth of power that a council member has around development in their own districts, and this is pretty much across the state, but definitely LA, facilitates the level of corruption that took place, he said. But Hueser wasn't just exploiting his position as representative of Council District 14, which is known as CD 14, in exchange for a series of favors. Now, this is what really got me. When I read this, I had to do a double take. In a plea agreement, Hueser admitted that from 2013 to 2020, he was the leader of a criminal ring called the CD 14 Enterprise, whose members were primarily lobbyists, consultants, and other city officials. So you're talking about a criminal organized crime ring that's being run through and within the LA, right? And it lays it out right there. It's very, this is from a legal filing. It talks about it here. Now, under the guise of governance, members of the CD14 enterprise raised and solicited funds from developers and their proxies with projects in CD14 to be paid to Hueser's desired accounts and political action committees in exchange for official acts. U.S. Attorney Martin Estrada called it, quote, one of the most wide-ranging and brazen public corruption cases ever uncovered in this district, which is saying a lot. Yes, true. Angelinos deserve better than being used for personal enrichment of politicians, grifting the system, and foreign investors whose currency is corruption. IRS Special Agent Tyler Hatcher said that Hueser, quote, leveraged his position to enrich himself and his close allies in a mafia-style organization. Now, he's talking about a mafia, right, being run by government officials. In August 2024, the New York Times reported that over the past decade, I mentioned, 576 public officials in California have been convicted on federal corruption charges, right, including, around 60 in LA and San Francisco. These numbers are so shocking that it's almost as if these cities have become you wonder if they've become miniature mafia states. I mean, it's strange. Prosecutors and political analysts argue that, quote, the heavy concentration of power at Los Angeles City Hall, the receding presence of local news media, a population that often tunes out local politics, and a growing Democrat supermajority in state government have all helped insulate office holders from damage. And I want to mention what he says here about, because I've noticed this in my own research, is the presence of local news media. I would call it like hyper-local news. I can go back to the mid-2000s and find way more blogs, local papers, and things like this talking about what's going on, for instance, in San Francisco and in LA than you can now. A lot of it's been consolidated when they've been bought out. And so you don't have as many voices paying attention to things that are happening at the hyper-local level. And basically, it's the same way they've noticed now that, like, Chinese organized crime is starting to hone in on rural areas in the U.S. It's what they do is they figure out what nobody's paying attention to, and that's where they're starting to go now. So that's just something to keep in mind. I know for the time, I want to end now I want to talk about, one thing that's discouraging when you investigate, these types of things is that even when I looked up in the academic literature, like how do you solve the problem of organized crime, like infiltrating, right? Any government. And nothing seems to work that well, right? To be honest. But one thing I ran across, and I want to look at that now, is there was an academic study that was published last year. I guess I'll call it the new Italian method. This is what it means, and I want to make sure so basically it's this thing called CDC. The acronym was CDC. What it means is canceling district council. So what they did was, this is kind of extreme, but areas where they've noticed for long periods of time where governments had been kind of infiltrated or they were being controlled, in different ways by or influenced by organized crime. What they do is they go in and they literally remove every single person involved in the council, mayor, all top to bottom, and they send in they call them like experts, people that have been trained to help to get out of that. And what's one thing that it's the only program that I've seen or evidence I've seen. What they've shown, the way that it works is within like years, a short period of time, you have the number of jobs start to increase, right, in the area. It even starts to affect communities nearby. The wages and stuff go up. And one of the main things is that the younger population who usually gets recruited into these programs, they tend to start having more jobs because these things aren't being controlled and limited in certain ways by the government officials. And I know this sounds like an extreme thing to just cancel all of them. But every place that they've done it now in Italy, it's I'm talking about dramatic results, dramatic increases. So that may sound pretty extreme. I don't know how that looks for a place like California, but it's the only thing I've really seen where there's real evidence of there being major changes is like full kind of removal of the people running the main position, who have these kinds of levers of power. And I don't know how that would work because there the central government could just do that, even down to the council level, but I don't know how that would work here.
Put them in jail.
Put them in jail, yeah, that would be nice. It seems like very hard to, one last thing I will say is that there are some unique features about California that I think that makes it susceptible, just different programs that they have. And one thing I'll bring up, just because it's one thing from this book that got a lot of press was, are you familiar with the behested payments system, right? In California, no other state has anything like this. It's where basically a private citizen or a company, if they support a program or something that a politician is doing in government, right? They can donate money, right, to be donated to that government program or whatever, but they do it through a nonprofit. It's called at the behest of the politician. So a business can donate money through this nonprofit. They then in turn give that to the government, right? Well, one thing, this is just kind of a funny note to end this, is one thing we found out in our book. Well, the point is this kind of a program is very ripe for corruption, as you can imagine, right? It's almost like legal, influence peddling in a way. But one thing that's interesting is what I found out in my research when I was going through, I noticed that there was a behested payments, right, that were made for the description of it in the behested payment donations is for a bronze bust to be erected in San Francisco City Hall, right, for a mayor. And it didn't say who it was, but I figured out it was for Gavin Newsom, right? And what it is behested payments were made, right, through a nonprofit and donated to, but a portion of those were actually given. They were paid through the nonprofit from two of his own private companies, Plump Jack, which is one of his wine companies, and Balboa Cafe is another one. But they actually donated a portion of the funds to fund his own bronze bust through this program. And the thing is, he was dishonest about it when he was asked about, we heard there's a bronze bust where, and his response was that, I've heard there's some admirers out there, there are people who are interested in doing this. There was no mention of the fact that he was helping fund it. He and people connected to him could have funded the whole thing, but all we know is that, about a third of it or whatever was funded through his, but that's an example of also that, and I won't get into this now, but California has, a lot of places have what's called a strong mayor system. And there's a lot of different ways that it can be good in certain ways. There's a lot of ways that allows certain types of corruption to enter in. But those are just two kind of anomalies that you have here. There's a lot more that I think do allow for certain types of corruption. But I think that's it. How would I say? That's a lot to cover.
There's so many stories in this book that will make your skin crawl, make your hair stand on end, and I want to ask Jedd about them. But I do also want to now publicly invite Gavin Newsom or anybody else that's mentioned tonight in this book to address the forum, because our members will be keenly interested to hear their take, right, on the corruption. We officially invite them to come. So this really isn't just about Newsom, but and it's certainly not, we're not a partisan group, but we are talking about the politics of California, so we only have one party to really talk about. But you detail a lot of Gavin's connection with the Gettys, who were kind of they were the Kardashians of their day in many ways, right?
Right.
Would it be fair to call him the Getty candidate?
I think that's fair. If there is, yeah, definitely. If there is one. A lot of this money and support is really traced back to that. Yep.
You have great stories about his upbringing. Do you want to share a little bit about Gavin's background?
Well, I mean, there's different things about his upbringing. I mean, one thing I can mention is how he does talk a lot about, things like how much the role that playing baseball in college had on his, on his life and the way he went about politics and all. But it turns out he didn't actually play in college, and we put that out in the book. His coach told us we contacted him. He was briefly on almost kind of like a JV version of the team at Santa Clara, but he never actually played. But there's multiple articles that he's written about him where he talks about his experience playing there and how much formative it was and everything. But I think Gavin Newsom, there's so many stories like that it's everything's performative and part of the image that he's building at that time. And I think that sometimes the media kind of lets him get away with not bringing up things he said in the past. One thing I'm surprised that I never hear about Gavin Newsom is you can see when he was on the board of supervisors, when he was really young, before he was mayor or anything, in San Francisco, he was interviewed a couple times, and he would say things like, the problem with politics in California are career politicians. He's like, this is the biggest problem. We don't need. He would say things like this about career politicians, and now, I mean, I wonder how, Gavin now would, think back on that, but, that's how it's hard to imagine him saying that now, but that's maybe something happened, and, maybe he did have a different attitude back then, but.
Okay, questions from the audience. Which politicians surprised you most in terms of their levels of influence? What was the most striking?
Yeah. All of it.
All of it.
Oh, you're asking me?
Yeah, I'm asking you.
Sorry. I thought you were asking them.
No.
Oh,
that was great. Yeah, who struck you the most? That's a question for you from the audience.
I would say.
I love it. He's up here studying. This guy, I want you to know, by the way,
I'm sorry.
he's like somebody called him tonight an intellectual superhero. He is so rigorous and fastidious in his research. He's thinking like he's looking up here for the answer because he doesn't even think I'm talking to him, but he's already researching.
I think who shocked me, in terms of politicians?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think that who's the most? That's a good one in terms of. I mean, it's hard to beat what these guys in LA. The last thing I was reading about what they were doing. I mean, running an organized crime ring. I mean, I would probably say local Los Angeles politicians in general is the most. It seems to be the most corrupt. San Francisco isn't that far behind, but I mean, in terms of a single person, I think that. Let me think about that. Ask me another one. I'm going to think about that. And
Okay.
answer that again.
All right.
Who I think is the most
All right. Well,
corrupt.
I almost fell over when I'm reading some of this.
It's hard-
It just
it's hard
went
to
on
pick,
and on and
actually.
on. So let's talk about the bullet train, because we have now, Jedd, you wrote in your book about the next project that we have coming, what is it called? Delta Conveyance Project. Right?
Which
I don't know about which.
Oh.
The Delta Conveyance Project, it sounds like we have another bullet train project coming in California. And of course, we
Right.
know that it'll come in on time and under budget.
Right.
Right?
I mean, it's remarkable to me because I've tried to imagine like a project like that was going on for so long with money missing and stuff in Florida and what would happen, right? Mm-hmm. I thought because we've had problems with various things like this, but this is like the numbers are so big, the amount of money and the amount of time that's passed for things not to happen that it almost seems as if it was set up just to be a never-ending project that could be people could just suck money from. It doesn't seem to me that there was ever really a full intention to ever actually get it done. And that's what I'm afraid it could be going on with this. Because, I mean, you can read in legal filings sometimes, there are organized crime groups who have literally helped facilitate and create fake infrastructure projects knowing it would never be finished. And so I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if that's what's happening here. They found a new way to create the never-ending, money train, I guess.
Yeah, somebody sent me some pictures yesterday that were actually pictures. I think they're near Sacramento, and they're of like something that looks like the train's going to come, but then it just sort of ends. It's like a little piece of a construction set, right? But it has no
Right.
purpose at all, and I think it's for pictures.
Well, and if you read, you try to do research on like why hasn't it been completed? There's literally 100 explanations. There's so many different combinations of explanations. It's hard to really pinpoint, what exactly we can't. There's multiple factors. And there's so many, and it's hard to get accurate information about the progress of large infrastructure projects like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know the Committee of 100? Are you familiar with the Committee of 100? Tell a little bit about that. I'm not familiar with them.
Let me get it right. I know that it's a group. It's a group of Chinese leaders, right? That are trying to help, I guess, build relationships between China and the U.S. Is that the group you're talking about?
I don't know. It's a question from the audience.
Oh, the audience. Yeah, China. I mean, there also have been people who've been involved in the United Front, the Chinese United Front, which is basically a group that operates on behalf of the Chinese Communist Party. And the Committee of 100 is a group of 100 people that are considered leaders and key people in doing various things, but they're not technically tied to the Chinese government, but they have a lot of ties that aren't related to the Committee of 100. But I mean, I don't know all the principles and everything that's involved with the group, like what they stand for, but I know that they're generally involved in that area. I was just doing some research on some members of, some United Front, I guess, operatives in Minnesota, and they had some involvement with Committee of 100. And there's been people in the Bay Area, several people who have been involved with that group also. But I don't know exact details. We don't cover that in the book, but I could find out some more information for anybody who asked.
So there are a couple people asking about Chinese buying farmland or land in general in the United States. Do you think that we have the enforcement resources and, more importantly, the will to put a stop to this?
We definitely have the tools and things to do it. I mean, to mitigate some of this, but it's more of the will. And I mean, can I give one more example from the book?
Please.
About, so this is actually an interesting thing. In California, a few years ago, Gavin Newsom had a chance. He actually vetoed a bill, right, that had unanimous bipartisan support, which is rare in California, right? And this bill would have banned foreign governments and state-owned entities, right, from buying agricultural land in California. He was the only one. He vetoed it. And the two reasons he gave was that it would be too strenuous to track this data, right? Keep track of it. Even though they're able to track all the what would it be, the equity, types of results you have to have from businesses. They got to report to the state, DEI, I think. They can track all kinds of things, right? So that's not really true. It's kind of a bogus response. The other one is that he says that this is already tracked at the federal level, like overseas purchase, but you can read report after report for the past 10 years saying they don't track it properly. Like basically say all you got to do is like create an LLC in Delaware and start buying up, and it could be literally a terrorist or there's no way to know. And they've known it. And so what I did in the book is I kind of cross-checked. I just picked like 5 companies, wineries even, like Gav that owns this agricultural land, and it doesn't show up in the database, but then here it is. You can see it. They are buying the land. So that was a bogus excuse too. So I don't know why he vetoed that bill. It's one of the most clear-cut, easy bills with bipartisan support, and that I think that goes back. It's a lack of a will. They have the ability to do it, and other states are passing these bills to do this exact thing. So if California did it, I think it would help a lot.
So this is always a tricky question, and it's coming up more and more, but it's sort of, we're sitting here, and the question from the audience is, do Chinese spies influence groups like ours, and what are they looking for?
Well, I mean, they definitely could. I mean, they any type of, because one thing I'm just, from looking at like you might call trends in Chinese espionage or whatever is
Sounds
now.
like a great magazine.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Is now you're seeing that a lot of the people involved aren't necessarily Chinese or Chinese American, right? It's just like a white guy working at a business, right? A lot of times. So when it gets to that level, it makes it a lot more difficult to track. A lot of these. Wait, could you repeat the question? I want to make sure.
I said, what are they looking for? Like, would they infiltrate a group like ours, and what would they be looking for?
They would be looking to. They'd be looking to shape what you're allowed to say. I don't think they wouldn't want you to say things like what we're saying tonight, right? About. So
you have to keep us in check. You'll know we've been infiltrated if we stop being honest stuff here.
Yeah, but I think what they would want to do here is they'd want if they were here, they would try to sway the opinion of certain people on certain topics, not everything, but certain topics. They'd pick certain topics. They have this motto. I think my boss talks about it in some of his book. They call it like big help with a little bad mouth. It's this like Chinese proverb or whatever. What it means is they'll allow people to kind of, say things they don't like or a little bit, because it allows, I don't know what it's tolerated that way. It allows them to have a little bit more of an infiltration in what they're doing, because they're not combating every little thing. They're allowing them to get down there, but by allowing that, it allows them to stay and figure out. What I would think is they were probably trying to just figure out how we operate and what we do. But I don't think they would actually try to change the entire views of a group like this, because it's too antithetical, I think, to what they want to accomplish.
Yeah. Brett, one of the things that was so interesting to me about your book, because you're just over and over and over sharing these stories of absolute criminality and compromise and just really unethical behavior. It just sort of sounds like dictator tactics that we're not used to. And one of the most shocking things that you shared was that the San Francisco Urban League gardeners were basically forced to campaign for Newsom in San Francisco in his mayoral campaign and prove and bring little tickets that prove that they voted.
Right, yeah, that's true. I mean, organized crime, you've shown, and even especially international organized crime, for whatever reason, they really like to target like waste management solutions and all. And I don't know if it's because people just don't like to pay as much attention to that. There's a lot of different reasons. It's a lot easier to hide what you're doing, how money's spent. Maybe it's kind of like lice removal salons, right? Nobody's looking that much into it, but the question is that situation was, that's true. It's been documented. They basically there were people. This goes back to the thing I mentioned earlier about ZNL Properties, who was arrested for bribery and charged. He bribed a guy, Mohammed Nuru, who was in charge of these groups that you're talking about. And what he did was he basically told them they would hold signs, they would campaign for him. They would even, like you said, take these tickets, they would go and vote for him. And they did it at threat of losing their jobs, mainly. So they weren't necessarily being paid, they were being told they were going to be fired. But also the impression you get when you read some of the exchanges is that this was a kind of not an uncommon thing for some state or some city, agency or some program or whatever, to have everybody within there kind of threatened in a way to go and vote or to do whatever it might be, for an election. That definitely happens, and it happens way more than is ever caught. Yeah.
One of your most careful readers says on page 30 of your book, it says, "But Newsom has always been more puppet." Who is the puppet master in your mind?
Okay, yeah. So I know you're talking. Yeah. So we talk about. I mean, really, it's a lot of the programs, a lot of things that Newsom, not in his personal life, but what he puts out there in terms of policy, where it's really just the same old, like kind of I say progressive. It's not as much Democrat. Kind of this progressive policy that's failed in a lot of ways in California, certain aspects of it. But he just kind of goes out there with what he's given. He tries to snazz it up maybe and do whatever. That's really what I mean by because the question was exactly what.
Who's the puppet master?
Yeah. The puppet master. I think the puppet master would be it's really this combination of, like, I would call it the political elite or the elite class that includes, this political group. I think they're ultimately, the ones behind it and the people who have funded them for a long time. Really, the Bay Area people going way back, whether it's the Gettys. I'm sorry? Pelosi. Yeah, Pelosi, the Getty family, which, I don't know if you know the history of that. It was, Gavin Newsom's dad was the attorney that handled the entire Getty estate. And, I mean, sometimes when you read stuff from Gavin when he was younger, it makes it seem as if, he didn't really benefit that much from that relationship. But, I mean, I don't think it's true. He went on trips, various places with them. He was close to the Getty family. I mean, he does business, winery and everything with the Getty family. But that circle, a group, the same people with the Pelosi's, Feinstein, they're the people, behind him, I think. Yeah. I say he's more puppet in the sense, I don't think he's coming up with his own original ideas and things like that. Is what I was based either. Personally.
Well, he is working hard on remaking himself. He's in South Carolina today.
Yeah. He's performs very good at remaking his image.
He's
and
at the coffee shops and the cafes shaking hands. You mentioned PG&E, and we know that, wow, Harris didn't prosecute PG&E or the CPUC after the San Bruno gas line explosion, and we had such terrible tragedies out here. We know that Newsom and his wife got significant donations from PG&E. So what do they get in return? And can you say something about how the lack of insurance in California is related to the fraud that these people?
Well, I know. I mean, part of what happened. So you're talking about what did PG&E? So the question is, what did they get out of it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in exchange, basically, Newsom helped craft the bankruptcy deal, right, that they went through, which basically absolved them of a lot of the responsibility for the wildfires in terms of cleaning up around the lines and various things, the maintenance that they were supposed to be done. This got them off the hook for a lot of that. And a lot of people have claimed or think that it's because of all the donations, that were given that could have played a part in it. But yeah, they definitely got off the hook in terms of payouts and things.
It's just like you were reading these stories and it was like the snaky story time, right? Because there's such a web of corruption in California. Jedd, I just want to ask you in closing, what do you think can be done, and what do you want the people in this room to walk away with tonight? I'd like them to walk away with, I'd like you, frankly, to be able to tell the stories from Jedd's book. They're just absolutely incredible stories, and I think everybody, as I said, who is a citizen and who votes needs to understand the level of corruption under which we live. But what do you want these couple hundred people in this room to do tomorrow morning when they wake up? What do you want them to do with this information, Jedd? What's your hope?
Well, I mean, I think that's really. I mean, I think one thing when it comes to this topic, organized crime, things like this, I think I would say courage. A lot of people just get kind of scared or worried about this. You know what I mean? Just talking about this topic, people in politics or people in general. So I'd say be courageous just to talk about it or bring it up. It's not that's one thing. The other thing I would say is, I don't know how to go about it, but what I talked about earlier is finding ways to, when things get so bad in certain places, right, and it can be determined, is to figure out a mechanism to have wholesale, people removed. And I don't know what that means, or even if you can't do that, to actually try to figure out how to actually have people removed from office sometimes. And that's a difficult thing to do. I don't know how necessarily you go about, well, maybe more recalls. Yeah, recall, right?
There is a recall petition in the room for you to sign. Want to put your hand up again? Again, the Liberty Forum is...
Yes,
And again, I really want to emphasize the Liberty Forum is nonpartisan. This is not about Democrat and Republican politics. This is about corruption and what's happening with our money and our state and our leadership. Jedd, thank you so much for coming out here for bringing the truth, revealing the truth. If you'd like a book from Jedd, please line up on this wall and he'll sign them and celebrate with you. And I'm going to jump over here.
Appreciate it.
Right? We appreciate, Jedd, you being with us, and thank you so much.
Thank you for watching our presentation. Please like and subscribe to our channel to get updates on new speakers, and consider joining the Liberty Forum of Silicon Valley. You can do so at our website. If you don't want to join, but want to support the principles of American liberty, you can make a tax-deductible donation via our website. The links are in the description. Thank you again, and stay free.